Hello and welcome to the Shakespeare podcast. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about Lady Macbeth and the central role that she has in the play. Lady Macbeth first appears in Act 1, Scene 5, reading the letter which her husband has sent her regarding the witches and their prophecy that he will become the king. Macbeth notes in the letter that this will impact Lady Macbeth, who he refers to in the letter as, quote, my dearest partner in greatness, and that Lady Macbeth should not be left unaware of, quote, what greatness is promised thee, as if the prophecy of the witches don't only affect him, but also affect her. And it would appear from the letter that Macbeth has real affection for his wife. Her first thoughts upon reading the letter are that Macbeth is too kind and too good to do what she calls what must be done. Thus thou must do, she says. It is not made explicit what she's referring to at this point. But she needs Macbeth to come to her, because she, Lady Macbeth, will give him the courage to do what he must do. Then Lady Macbeth learns from the messenger that King Duncan will be stopping the night at their castle, and she can scarcely believe her luck. Quote, the raven himself is hoarse, that croaks the fatal entrance of Duncan. So her first thought, therefore, is to murder Duncan. The reference to the raven is a reference to the devil, because ravens were thought to be working for the devil. And she asks the spirits of the air to, quote, unsex me, i.e. stop her from being a kind and nurturing woman, and fill her up with, quote, the direst cruelty. She wants the spirits to stop her from feeling remorse, to turn her breast milk to gall. The contents of the gallbladder was known for its bitterness, definitely not the kind of thing you'd feed to a baby. She also asks the spirits of the air that the night might cover up all her evil deeds. So it's pretty obvious that Lady Macbeth is not a nice person. She thinks Macbeth is too good and too kind, and that she needs to put a stop to that it's Lady Macbeth that's going to make Macbeth commit the murder. Now again, Macbeth enters here and he refers to her as my dearest love. I've seen productions where Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, when they first meet in Act 1, are all over each other like a pair of love-struck teenagers. This, of course, helps to contrast with their dysfunctional relationship later in the play. But Macbeth's first comment to Lady Macbeth is about Duncan staying the night. And she gets it, just as she did do when the messenger told her that Duncan was staying from the night. So it's obvious that they're both thinking the same thing. But it's Lady Macbeth who is the one who says it, who expresses and articulates that they should murder Duncan, saying that he never shall son that morrow see. She tells Macbeth to pretend to be a good host to Duncan, and then adds, leave all the rest to me. So at this point, it's obvious they've both been thinking about murdering Duncan so that Macbeth can become king, and of course Lady Macbeth can become queen. But at this point, it's Lady Macbeth who's taking the lead role. She's the one who's saying, leave all the rest to me. So the audience knows exactly what the plan is. Duncan, of course, suspects nothing. And the next scene opens in a rather comical fashion with Duncan saying, "This castle hath a pleasant seat. So we've just seen Macbeth and Lady Macbeth plot Duncan's murder, and then the murder victim turns up and says, "Oh, it's nice here, isn't it?" When Lady Macbeth reappears, she's being nice to Duncan, but we know that she's planning to murder him. Lady Macbeth is excessively polite to Duncan, and Duncan comments on how much Macbeth loves his wife. He arrives at the castle before Duncan because his love for Lady Macbeth has made him ride faster. Duncan takes Lady Macbeth's hand so that she can escort him into the castle. All of which, of course, is symbolic for us, the audience, because we know that she's planning to murder him. Enter Macbeth. And at this point, just as Lady Macbeth has pointed out to us earlier, Macbeth is having second thoughts about the murder of Duncan. Lady Macbeth enters, and Macbeth says to her quite explicitly, quote, "We will proceed no further in this business." And he's quite clear about this. He's the man of the house, and he's putting his foot down, and he's laying down the law. And she completely ignores him. She accuses him of not keeping his word. She says that his word can't be worth very much, and quote, "From this time shall I account thy love." So you said you'd murder Duncan, and now you've decided you wouldn't, in much the same way that you told me that you loved me, and apparently now you don't. "So this is how you behave," says Lady Macbeth to Macbeth. "You say one thing, but you mean something else. Are you a man or a mouse?" He actually tells her that she should be quiet, and she ignores him again. "If you're a real man," she says, "you'd murder Duncan. Be so much more the man," she says. Lady Macbeth brings her point over even more strongly by saying, "Look at me, I'm only a woman, but I'd do it. I've had a baby breastfeed, but I'd brash out its brains if I'd sworn to do that in the way that you'd sworn to murder Duncan." Macbeth at this point begins to waver and says, "But what happens if we fail?" And Lady Macbeth laughs at him and calls his courage into question. She then describes in detail how they will commit the murder. He's still not sure, but she convinces him, and we end Act 1 with Lady Macbeth convincing her husband to commit murder. Now, it might seem remarkable that Lady Macbeth has such a great influence over her husband, and of course it's one of the great talking points of the play. Macbeth had already decided against the murder, and it's Lady Macbeth that convinces him to kill Duncan. Is he so in love with Lady Macbeth that she can get him to do anything she wants? Is Macbeth, in modern terms, a simp? Or was he always thinking about murdering Duncan? And really, Lady Macbeth is just giving him the extra push that he needs. At the beginning of Act 2, Lady Macbeth tells us that she has drugged the guards' drinks, and she's laid out their daggers so that after the murder the guards will be blamed for the murder. She practically does everything apart from actually killing Duncan. Macbeth enters and says, "I have done the deed." Macbeth instantly regrets what he's done, but Lady Macbeth is the one who tells him to pull himself together, that he shouldn't be thinking of brain sickly things, as she calls it, a foolish idea, that he should go and washes the blood off his hands. And it's Lady Macbeth who takes the daggers back to the scene of the crime where Macbeth was supposed to have left them, and she smears blood on the sleeping guards to implicate them in the murder. All of this is done by Lady Macbeth, whilst Macbeth regrets what he's done and talks about the guards making a noise. The scene ends with Macbeth unable to get the blood off his hands, and there's knocking from off stage. The knocking continues into the next scene, where the porter lets in Macduff and Lennox, who've arrived to wake up the king. They discover that the king has been murdered, and the alarm is raised, and Lady Macbeth turns up to ask what all the commotion is about. Macbeth kills the guards before they can be asked about Duncan's murder, and this looks rather suspicious. To make things worse, Macbeth's explanation is a bit thin. So Lady Macbeth pretends to faint in order to cause a distraction. And the distraction works, because we next hear that Malcolm and Donalbain, Duncan's sons, have decided to leave the castle and run to a foreign country. Malcolm to England, Donalbain to Ireland. So at the end of Act 2, it looks very much as if the Macbeths have gotten away with murder, and that Lady Macbeth has been the main reason why the murder got committed and why they got away with it. And now a short interlude in which I'm going to interrupt the podcast to ask you to like and subscribe. Like and subscribe, everybody. At the beginning of Act 3, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are organising a dinner party. One of the people invited to that dinner party is Banquet, Macbeth's old friend from the battle scene in Act 1. They want Banquet to attend the dinner party, and they make a great show of making sure that he'll be there on time. However, Macbeth is planning Banquo's murder, and he won't be making any dinner parties anytime soon. Macbeth is lost in thought, having organised the murder, and Lady Macbeth tries to cheer him up with the thought that what's done is done, she says. But Macbeth tells her that he's having a bad time sleeping, that he's got, quote, terrible dreams, that he would be, quote, better be with the dead. And as Lady Macbeth continues to try and cheer Macbeth up, it becomes apparent that he's inconsolable. He is at least, however, honest with his wife about the situation that he finds himself in, and he tells her, "Oh, full of scorpions is my mind, dear wife." Lady Macbeth asks him what is going on, because she obviously doesn't know, and he replies, quote, "Be innocent of the knowledge, dearest Chuck, till thou applaud the deed." The contrast here is with the murder of Duncan, in which Lady Macbeth took a leading role. When it comes to the murder of Banquo, she doesn't seem to know even the details of what's going on. Later in the act, Banquo is murdered. Macbeth receives news of the murder from one of the murderers whilst he's at the feast, and Banquo's ghost appears. Lady Macbeth begins by acting as a chief cheerleader at the feast, telling everybody what a great time they're having. And then, as Macbeth becomes more and more disturbed by Banquo's ghost, it's Lady Macbeth's job to try and cover for him. Macbeth sees the ghost and becomes unsettled, and his behaviour becomes irrational. The guests are concerned at their host's behaviour, but Lady Macbeth says, quote, "Sit, worthy friends, my lord is often thus, and hath been from his youth." She covers up for him, and he tries, on his part, to keep it together, even by proposing a toast at the feast. I'll drink to it general joy of the whole table. Despite Lady Macbeth's best efforts, Macbeth continues to get worse and worse, and the feast has to come to an abrupt end. Lady Macbeth apologises to everyone and the guests leave. She stops trying to console him, and Macbeth is consumed by his own thoughts, and also by the idea of why Macduff didn't appear at the banquet. At the end of Act 3, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth exit to go to bed. This is the last time in the play that we see Lady Macbeth and Macbeth together. Lady Macbeth doesn't appear in Act 4, but in Act 5 the act opens with the doctor and the maidservant talking about Lady Macbeth. She's been sleepwalking and she's been talking in her sleep. The doctor asks the maid what Lady Macbeth has said, but the maid tells us that she can never repeat what she's heard. Enter Lady Macbeth sleepwalking. She's trying to wash her hands, but cannot get rid of the blood that is on her hands. "Out, damned spot," she says. "Out, I say." To make things worse, she incriminates herself in the murder of Duncan by saying, quote, "Yet who would have thought the old man to have had so much blood in him?" In most productions of the play, at this point the doctor and the maid look at each other, both knowingly and quite appalled, because she's confessing to her part in the murder of Duncan. And then Lady Macbeth implicates herself by referring to the murder of Lady Macduff, by saying, "The Thane of Fife had a wife, where is she now?" The Thane of Fife, of course, being Macduff. The doctor tells the maid that she's heard too much, to which the maid replies that Lady Macbeth has said too much. Lady Macbeth starts to talk about Banquo and his ghost, quote, "He cannot come out of his grave." And then she exits off to bed saying, "What's done cannot be undone." The doctor's speech at the end of the scene tells us that Lady Macbeth doesn't need a doctor, that the help she needs is quote unquote divine, meaning both God and priest. Later, Macbeth asks the doctor, "How does your patient, doctor?" When he asks the doctor to cure his wife, he appears to be talking about himself. Cannot the doctor, quote, "raise out the written troubles of the brain"? When the doctor says that he can't do that that's not really what a doctor does, Macbeth dismisses him and calls for his armour. In an aside at the end of the scene, the doctor wishes that he was not stuck in such a God-forsaken place. In Act 5, Scene 5, the women cry out, and Macbeth is unmoved because, as he himself says, quote, "I have supped full with horrors." He's unmoved by this kind of thing by now. He's seen too many terrible things to be affected by screaming women. When he's told that the cries were at the death of his wife, Macbeth is indifferent to what happened to Lady Macbeth, saying she should have died hereafter. There would have been a time for such a word. It's only at Malcolm's speech at the end of the play do we learn that Lady Macbeth has killed herself. Quote, "Of this dead butcher and his fiend-like queen, who, as 'tis thought, by self and violent hands took off her life." There's a great change in Lady Macbeth from the hard but confident woman who convinces her husband to commit murder in Act 1 to the sleepwalking patient who ultimately takes her own life in Act 5. Similarly, there's a huge change in her relationship with Macbeth, from the love that they have at the beginning of the play to his indifference at her death at the end of the play. Maybe murdering people really does interfere with your love life. And that's where we'll end this episode today. Thank you for listening. and I look forward to hearing from you next time.